We've already mentioned state. State is a variable, an attribute, a field, a properties. Those are different names, different words for the same thing. Let's look at this simple class called calculator, which has one variable inside it. Now this variable, you'll notice, is not a static variable. It's a non-static variable, which means that for each calculator that I create with this class, it will have a different memory, an individual memory. It also has one non-static function or method here, which adds together two numbers and returns the result. If I extend this a little bit, if I also include a static string variable, which is the model number here of the calculator, then that's going to be the same for every single instance of that class that I make. In this case, I have a static method, and the static method is reset that model. I have a double addition, which I described earlier on, but in this case, you'll notice that the static reset model references the variable model here. Now my question for you is, can a static method reference a non-static variable? So for example, the static method reset model, could I have changed the memory in that one? To answer that question, let's work our way quickly through this little scenario. To begin with, at point A, we've made two separate calculators, Ken and John. So here we go. Point A, Ken is Casio. Oh, they're both exactly the same. They're equal. There's nothing personalized. The only thing that's different about them is that the names of the reference variable which holds them is different. When I say Ken.memory is 5 point whatever, and John.memory is 4.3, from that point onwards, the memory changes in both of them. When I say here that Ken.model is Casio 123, now at that point, John.model also changes to Casio 123 because model is a static variable and there's only one of them for every single instance of that calculator. Then on the next line, when I change the model again, using John this time instead of Ken, then that changes the one location which holds model for all of the calculators, and therefore Ken.model would also be equal to Texas Instruments at that point. And finally, when I say Ken.reset, because reset changes a static variable, then it resets both of them, so the model numbers are both equal again. Incidentally, this is how we might trace the program. So if you're ever asked in an exam to trace a program, you would start off with one column for each of the variables that you're interested in, and the lines of the program here, and beside the relevant lines of the program, beside each line you'd write how the value changes as you go down. These are just the points that I showed in the previous slide. Now, another thing about state is how visible it is, and you say that by using a word in front of it, a modifier in front of it, to specify its scope. For example, I can make a variable private, which means that it's only visible within that class, and that's very, very useful if I want to hide that data and make it only accessible to the code inside that class. So again, none of these other things. A different class in the same package can't access it. A different package, but a subclass of that package can't access it either. An unrelated class with the same module is a new thing in the new version of Java, can't access it. So the only thing that can access it is that individual class. If I don't specify at all, and I say int j, well, that means that any class within the same package as this class can access it. So it's not quite as wide as a public variable, but it means that anything else which I create in the same folder, the same package, can also access that variable. Then I can also say protected. So specifically, that means that everything in the package can access it, but it also means that anything which subclasses a class in that package can get it as well. And finally, if I create something as a public variable, then anyone can access it and change it, so that's rather more dangerous. So let's summarize what we just talked about. Variables can have different modifiers, as well as their types and their default values, etc. The default, if you don't put any modifier in front of it, is package private, which means it's visible to everything else in the same folder or the same package. A primitive variable, i.e. one that's not an object, if they're declared, they are given defaults even if they're not initialized. So in other words, if I create int x and I don't give it a value, it will be given the value of 0. An object or a reference instance variable, like a string, will be null if it hasn't been assigned or initialized with the new keyword in Java. A static variable, there's only one of them. Every static variable and static method that you define, there's only one of them, and the value is shared by every instance of that class, like the model of the calculator. This can be really useful in some situations. Constants, if you want a variable not to be changeable, then don't get confused with the word static. Even though static in English means that it doesn't change, that means there's only one in programming. Whereas if you put the word final before a variable as a modifier, that means that it can't be changed.